Okay, welcome everyone. So we are on module 10, chapter 10, inheritance, and the title of chapter 10 is called inheritance. So in Python, as well as other languages, is Python inheritance is a OOP or object-oriented programming that allows a subclass or a child class or classes. You can have many subclasses or child classes to inherit programs, methods, functions from another class, in this case, a superclass or a parent class, which is called something called a base class. So what we have is basically a base class, and a base class is is the parent class. Okay, so here, uh, the base class here, I'm going to call person. So this is the base class where the another class is going to do, which is called the derived class, is going to inherit the um, attributes and methods and uh, other functions based on this person class. All right, so we have a function called a. We're going to first initialize the function, and then we're going to create the self. And then we're going to pass two parameters, name and age. Okay, and then we're going to initialize the parameters. So here, this is supposed to be name here. Okay, there we go. Okay, so self.name, and then here we have the self.age. Okay, so we're initializing the two parameters called the name and age. We're going to initialize and create we're going to initialize. And then here we're going to create a method called the display info. And remember, a method is used to call, and we're going to print the results. So here we're going to say F for formatting, and then the name, self, name. So, and then here we're going to call the age. So let's put, there we go. And then here we're going to call the self age, and make sure you close it at the end, just like this here. Okay, so this is the method here, so as you can see. So we're defining a function. Okay, you don't need this, the two underscores. Okay, so we're defining a method here, which in our case is called display info. That's going to print the results of basically the name and age of this person class here. Okay. All right, so let's go back here. Now, there's something called a derived class, and this is a subclass. Okay, so we can call this a parent class. This is a subclass. So here I'll just put sub or child class, and you can have many child classes referring to that one parent class. And so why have this here? Well, you want to separate your code. Okay, so the separation of the code is easier to read. So here I call this the student class, and then here we call the parent class. So the child class is the student class, and we're calling the person class, which is considered the parent class. Okay. So now here we're going to define initialize. Same thing here. The name, age, and then here we got the student ID. Okay, just like this here. And then here we're going to call the constructor. So right here, we're going to call the constructor of the base class. Okay, so here, this is where we have the constructor here. Okay, so where we initialized everything. So in this case, the name and age. So I got to write that down. The constructor is used to initialize in our case, the name and age. So here we're going to call the constructor from the base class, from the base class. So here there's a keyword called super. And here, if you do super, and then here we're going to say init, and we're going to call the name and also the age. And this is how we can call the base class. So here we said super here, okay, and then here we said name and age. So what this means is I want to get the name and age from my constructor here because this is the person class is considered a superclass here. Okay. Okay. Now, um, so here when you click on enter, so what we should have is basically uh, where we can call the actual method now. So here we're going to call the student ID. Okay. Uh, so this is we're going to initialize the student ID here because the student ID comes from the student class, which is again the subclass or the child class. So the name and age, so we're pretty much putting together the name and age from the superclass and the student ID from the subclass here. Okay. Now we're going to call the method. So it's called display info. Okay. So when we call the method display info, so what we want to do is call the call this method here. So here I'm going to call it student underscore info. Okay, and then here we're going to say self period, and we should see the method here display info. So this method um, function right here comes from the person class. So as you can see right there. Why? Because we call the superclass right there. Okay, so as soon as we call that, it's going to give us the printout. And then here we're going to print the student ID. And so that's going to be the ID. We're going to close it just like this. Okay, and then we're going to create the objects of the derived class. So this part here, create the object of the derived class. Okay, so right there. Okay, all right, so here, student is the variable. Student is the base class. John Doe is the actual name. 21 is the age. And here we just call it something like S123, and that's going to be the student ID. So John Doe, that's the attribute that gets passed to the actual name. 21 gets passed to the name, and S123, I'm sorry, 21 gets passed to the age, and S123 gets passed to the age here. I'm sorry, student ID. Sorry about that. Okay, now, so we're going to call the student variable, and here we should see the display student info. So display student info, and then so when we call that, so this function here, so it's going to give us the printout. Okay, so let's go and run it. So as you can see, we got John Doe, 21, and then student ID S123, just like this here. So we can reuse this too. So for example, if I copy and paste this here, okay, and here I'll see Jane Doe, and let's say she's about 25, and we'll do S456. Okay, go ahead and run it again. Okay, so as you can see, we got Jane Doe as 25, and so forth. However, we didn't see basically John Doe. Okay, so because we have to create the another object for that. So here I could say student one and student two. So here I'll say student one, display student one, and in here we're going to say display student two. So now we should get basically John Doe and Jane Doe. Okay, run this again. Okay, just like this here. So so as you can see, we're reusing that particular object there. Okay. Now we can create another child class. You can create as many as child classes as you want. So I'm going to start down here after the student class, and all you gotta do is type in class again. Okay. So after you type in class, you type in your child class name. So in this case here, I call it courses. Okay, and then here we're gonna call again here the student class, just like this here. So you'll notice that the student class calls the base class, and here a child class can call another child class here. Okay, so that's perfectly okay. So the reason why we want to do that is because we want to know which courses that the student uh, is going to take. Okay, so it looks something like this here now. Okay, so now here we're going to create a initialize with our constructor. Okay, in it, name, age, student underscore ID. So the name and age comes from the base class, and the student ID comes from our first child class. Okay, and in here we're going to add the course, the course name. So as you can see, it looks something like this here. Let me just move this out of the way a little. Okay, something like that. Okay. All right. So here, so we're putting together the base class and the two child classes. So as you can see here, make sure you put a colon there. Okay. So here's our constructor. So it's going to initialize what we want to output pretty much. Okay. So here we're going to do the same thing here. So what we're going to do from the courses is basically call super, which is the base class here. Okay, so here when we call super, we're calling the base class initialized. So what we want to initialize is basically the name, the age, and then the student ID. Okay, because so remember the name and age comes from the base class, and the student ID comes from the from my from our first subclass. Okay, so in this case here, the courses, so the reason why we can call student ID as a super is because the courses um, is calling the student class here, and the student ID is from the student class. So we're connecting all the outputs from the three classes. Okay, self, and here we're going to say course name. So here, the name of the course name is basically um, we can put Python later on. Okay, so that's going to initialize the course name. Okay, okay, define, display. Okay, and then here we're going to say display underscore course underscore info. So that's going to display the name of the course, basically for us. Okay, all right. So the name of the course is going to be again in my case it'll be Python. Okay, so from here we're going to call the actual uh, display course and course display student info. So here that's the function right there. Now, if you look at this here, display student info, so if you scroll up, display student, it's this function here. So it's going to display the student and the course of where the student, for which course the student is taking. Okay, right here, print, student ID. Okay, student ID. So that's going to basically give us the actual student ID there. Okay. Um, I'm sorry, I got it here actually. So this would be course. Sorry about that. Course. And then here what we want is the course underscore name. Okay. And so that's going to print out the course for us. Now we got to create the object for that, for the courses class. Okay, so from here we can say basically uh, course one equals uh, it was called courses, right? Yeah, courses, just like this here. So now what we could do is basically put all this right here. So here I can put all this right there over here, and then add the actual course, Python programming. Okay, so now if you look at this here, let me look like this. So I can call courses because courses has inherited student there. So let me just copy this here. Okay, so this would be course one, course two, Jane Doe, 4 by 6. Let's say she's taking Java programming, and all we got to do is change this part here. So we got that, and then display course info. So what we want to do is call this course info right there. So it looks something like this here, and then here display course info right there. Okay, like this. So display course info. Okay, so if you go and run it, so now we should have John Doe 21, student ID, course is Python, Jane Doe 22, student ID, Java programming, just like this here. Now, when you create the object, the reason why I can choose courses now is because courses has inherited student, and student has inherited person, and the person is basically the base class. All right, so now let's talk about import statements and how they work. Okay, so using the import statement is very useful, especially if you have separate files. So you notice that we only have one file here. So um, I'm going to create another file here. So if you click on the project on the top and then click on the add new item, you should see the Python class or empty. It doesn't matter which one you choose. Here, I'm going to call this the info. And here we should get a new file here, so as you can see. So I'm going to do it one more time, a new file, and we'll call this the transfer. So we got two new files here, info and transfer. So let's start with the info file. And you'll notice that I'm going to have to right click and then click on the set as start file. Okay, before anything. So here we're going to we're going to stick with the same theme, the person class, create a constructor here. Okay. And then we're going to pass again the name and age. we're going to initialize. Okay, there we go. And then we're going to create a function called, I'm sorry, a method called getInfo. The method is going to be called, and here we're going to return the name of the person. Okay, so we got the return statement. Okay, and then here we're going to do the same thing as we did before. So we know what that does now. Okay, initialize. Okay, like this here, same thing. Okay, we're going to call the superclass. So we know what that does. Initialize. From the superclass, we're going to call the name and age, since that's what we have. Okay, and then here we're going to call the student ID. Initialize that. Okay, and then here we got the get info method. That's going to return the student ID. Okay, something like this here. Okay, and then we're going to call the super class. So super, and then here under the super class, which is the person class, we have something called a get underscore info method on line number 7. So here we're going to call that. So that method there. Okay, so there we go. So now, okay, there we go. Okay, so now, oops, let me just go back up here. All right, so now we're going to go to the the transfer class, and then we're going to use something called the import statement. So if I go to the transfer class, the first thing you want to start out is basically the word from. Info. Info is the name of the class, name of the file. Import statement, I want to import either the person or the student class. So I want to import the student class just because that's the base class. Okay. Now here, right, so that's basically the file name, student. So we're going to pass one parameter with open student text file. And what we want to do with that text file is basically we want to write something into it. Okay, something like that. And as file is a variable name. We're going to use that as file basically to write the student underscore info. Okay, look, that looks like this here. Okay, so let's stop here. So the student is what we're passing, but if you look at basically the get info, so you notice that this is what we want to pass right there, to get info. Now we could do that is because we imported the student class there. Okay. All right. So now when we write, so now so obviously that's going to write that file. So now we're going to have to call. So here I'm going to say name and input function, enter. enter the student name. So there's our three inputs there. Okay. Okay, and then here we're going to create the object, student. Now we can call student, and remember it has three. There we go. So as you can see, we're calling student now from here, and we're calling each one uh, of the inputs here. Okay, so now I'm going to call this write to file. So we're combining them, so as you can see, and we're going to fulfill that the parameter, basically the student, which is going to call the get info, and then we got a confirmation. Okay, recorded the student info, something like this. So where you want to start is here. So if I right click, set up start a file, click on the run. So here it should ask us to. Oh, I have an error here. Give me 1 minute. Somewhere around there. Let's see why. Import info, and then the student class. Let me see this one more time here. String info line something. So if you go back to the info, I noticed that right here, when it's calling the super class here from the return statement, I have to open the curly bracket. So that's on the info. So if I go back, run, so I'm just going to put Ch11, 21, student ID, A123, and as you can see, it's got the student recorded. I'm going to run it one more time. A456. Okay, so if I click on the open, and you should see the student info right there. Okay, that looks like that. Student ID and so forth. All right, so now you notice that it overwritten. So here, what you could do is use the A for append. And so that should append it. I'll just put my name. Okay, so if you go back here, so you notice that it does append it. It's just like this here. So I gotta format that too. So you notice that when I write it right here, so this is where it's going to write it. So I can use that write next line just to separate the output like this. Okay, I'll run it one more time. Say she's okay. Now if I go back to student info text file, you notice that here we got the third student in that particular format. Okay, so we said from import student, and you can do as many as you want. Okay, that's the great thing about this here. So I could say from name of the text file, import another class here. Now we said student is because not person, because student has an inherited person. So student has inherited person here. Okay, so I can see right there. All right, so please start on next. Uh, on module 10, you'll see the class exercise, and I've created the class exercise 10 where there are lab materials and also exercises right after the lab materials. Okay, and it should be good practice. All right, everyone, have a nice day, and I'll see everyone soon. Bye bye.